wrote a thing song. Thank you for having me. What a beautiful event you put on. So some writers write what they know, which is the oldest adage. Some rebel and say, write what you don't know. I'm of the school of thought that says, write what you want to know. Or better yet, write to get to know what you didn't know you didn't know. I write to get to know myself. What I want to know in my writing usually is, why are we so afraid of each other? Especially in the immediate political climate, fiction is a tool for empathy. It's not an escape from reality. It is an invitation to think broader, deeper, and beyond our own skin. It's an invitation to figure out how we are connected. In my fiction, I put myself in many selves to learn who I am and where my own biases reside. By finding my own prejudices, there's hope in letting them go. For my novel, The Suicide of Claire Bishop, I spent years inside the head of a man with schizophrenia to see how I could relate, to see why I was afraid of relating, and to invite readers to find evidence of themselves in a man who, on the surface, is very different from them. For the short story you're about to hear, as challenging as it was to write about schizophrenia, it was just as hard to find myself in the head of a little boy. Little boys are alien to me. I've never been one. What do I know? What do they think about? What are they afraid of? And why are they always fighting and picking their noses? Of course, the lesson is we're all afraid of pretty much the same things. Like I do for my other characters, I gave this little boy amplified versions of my own neuroses and a collage of fears of people I know. Because fiction is not about making things up. It's about stealing weird things from your friends. And it's about highlighting that pesky irony. If we connected about our fears, we would probably fear a lot less. So thank you for having me and making prose this living thing.
My father was a great listener of jazz, but he was a lot of other things, and I don't think great listener of jazz is on the list of things my mom remembers him for. Still, she asked if I'd pick something to play at the funeral, which she put herself in charge of when no one else would. Something he would have enjoyed, my mom said. You knew him better than me. And I said, what do I know? He stopped sharing his music with me long ago. He started hiding his records from me way back when I was 11 or 12. That was after he took me and my friend John skiing in Mammoth. It was the only ski trip we ever went on, though he promised we'd go every year after that. He'd start talking it up each November, but by December, when the snows came, something inevitably happened. Like when I was 13 and he broke his rib from the water hoses at protests in Berkeley. When I was 14, he got a DUI on his motorcycle, and no one gave him any slack when he explained that Thelonious Monk had just died. Or when I was 15 and my mom divorced him. Or me getting suspended from school for the only test I got caught cheating on. So that trip with John and my dad was special. It was a man's bonding trip, he said. Who needs Boy Scouts? I sat up front with my dad in the VW van with its dust-crusted vents and patchwork seats. John was in the back, no seatbelt. I was whipping my eyes between the speedometer and the speed limit signs, biting my lip. 18 miles over, 20, 21. Every time the needle climbed, I started over from 1 and counted up to our speed. I still do that sometimes. I tapped my dad on the shoulder. Dad, slow down, I said. Whoo-wee, Dad said. Crack a window, would you? John was farting up a storm in the backseat. Dad leaned his long arm back and around toward John, waving the air around some. My dad let me drive when I was 8, John said. Your dad's an idiot, Dad said. Then Dad gave me one of those slide-off-his-face grins that meant he was up to no good. Look, Scotty, he said, no hands. He lifted his fingers from the steering wheel on a windy stretch of mountain road. Then he said, "You better take the wheel. Icy out there." I scooted lower in my seat. He was testing me. "What?" he said. "You don't trust me?" I didn't answer. Then he grabbed my left hand and put it on the side of the steering wheel. I sat straight as I could to see the road. I jerked to the right to keep from swaying. "Drifts to the left a little, don't it?" he said, and nodded approvingly. But he took the wheel again. We drove straight through, 7 hours from Fresno, where we lived, to Mammoth, and got there at night so we'd hit the slopes first thing in the morning. Dad was too cheap to pay for a hotel, so we slept in the van. We had it set up so there was a bunk bed above his, which was really just a piece of plywood propped up on poles with a sleeping pad on top, barely 2 feet below the ceiling. Not even enough room to sit up. John and I shared the bunk, Dad below. It was snowing heavily. We could see our breath hit the roof. John had his toy pistol at his hip, which he always slept with. "To keep us safe," he said. We whispered stupid jokes over the racket of Dad's snoring. I laughed loud and knew they were dirty, but didn't understand why. There must have been a heavy thud in my dreams, but it was John who woke me hours later, whispering in my ear, "Scotty, I think the van is breaking." "Nah, it's fine," I said. It's just an old sucker." Then I heard it, the deep bite of rusting metal right above our heads. I reached my hand up and realized the 2-foot gap had shrunk to 1. The ceiling was damp. I sat up on my elbows and hit my head on the top of the van. "Dad," I said, "Dad, the roof's caving in." Dad kept snoring. "Dad," I said, "do something." "Go back to sleep," he said. "You're fine." "We're gonna die," I said. We could hear him crouching up in bed below, and I pictured him as a hunchback in the gray light. "Where's the cereal?" he said. He was still mostly asleep. "The roof is sinking," I repeated. The roof groaned softly in confirmation. "What do you want me to do about it?" Dad asked. I didn't say anything. I wanted him to make it go away. We heard him mess around below, and then he squeezed himself to half standing in the tight space between bunk and window, his back to us. He squeaked away the condensation and cupped his hands around his eyes to see better out the window in what little moonlight there was. I could tell by his silence he was thinking up a plan to save us. Maybe he was remembering the names of tools, or if he knew of a mechanic around here. Maybe he was counting in his head how much money we had to see if we could afford a motel. But then he turned to us and shrugged. "A branch must have fallen on us from the snow," he said. "Yeah, we'll get it in the morning." He looked about ready to duck back under the bunk and disappear for the whole fatal night. I must have let out a whimper, because then he was searching around the van, found his tall snow boot. "Here," he said. He reached over the bunk so his arms were at our feet and wedged the boot in, squished between roof and plywood. "There, that'll hold her. Now go back to sleep or you'll ruin tomorrow." He crawled back under and lay in bed as if we weren't in terrible danger. It was dark, but we swore we saw a crease forming above us, down the length of our bodies. The van ached out another moan. The snow fell. I already felt my bones crunching under the weight, anticipating destruction, death by snowflake. I had a clear picture in my mind of my mother crying over our demise in front of the rabbit-eared TV, the late-night news lighting up her tears, but I took some comfort in the idea that my dad might use the word avalanche and make my death sound adventurous. Because, of course, in my fantasy, he survives. John pulled out his toy six-shooter and fired down the length of the van, whispering his sound effects. He fired at the roof, he fired at our feet, he fired at my dad. I didn't try to save him from John. I held my breath and blinked hard 10 times. A nightmare-warding ritual I had. I remember John put the gun away and held my hand. His was sweaty. "Tell your dad it's not working," he whispered. "I can hear you," Dad said. "Stop complaining." Then he went back to snoring. The night must have been something to see. Gusts chomping, the snow burned around and around. We lay there flat on our backs, unmoving, waiting to be crushed to death. The next day we skied until our faces hurt. Dad would race down the hill ahead of us, muttering all the way, then wait to see we made it to the bottom. He'd yell at me to stop doing the pizza the whole slope, and I'd yell back, I can't. I do remember that Dad was babying me, and I wanted to prove that I could without his help, board that horrific apparatus called the ski lift, so I raced ahead to my own chair with John. John taught me how to hawk a loogie at the skiers below, but I kept looking back to check up on Dad. All alone, strapped into his bench in the middle of the air, he looked lonely. Bundled up in his blue romper sweatsuit, he looked like a little kid from where I was, a chair above. Until a blonde lady ended up sitting next to him, and then he was a hound dog, hooting through the valley, and he didn't look lonely anymore. He was laughing all the way up the slope, very unlike him. I felt bad I hadn't sat with him first. Sweating and smelling like wet mutts, we went to the fancy ski lodge and snuck in to use their showers, where there were fancy shampoos installed in dispensers on the tile walls. Gotta be clean for the ladies, Dad said. Your mother won't want grubby boys stinking up the van. He was humming Charlie Parker and ruffling my wet hair with a towel. But the fun's not over yet. We're gonna stay one more night. What do you say? I say no, I said. We're supposed to go home. Mom's waiting for us. Jesus H. Christ, you got wrinkles already. You're too young to be so punctual. They must have mixed you up at the hospital. Can't it be a mine? He said in an Italian accent. In the mirror, he combed his hair with his fingers and said, listen, Scotty, Mom's got nothing planned, unless you call a casserole an occasion. Trust me, you need a little spontaneity. Can't you see I got something up my sleeve? But what about the roof, John mumbled. But what about the roof, I said to Dad. Roof's fine, Dad said. Better than driving home in the dark. Safer, okay? We ate gas station sandwiches across from the resort, standing under the awning, our white breath billowing out of us in the cold. John was thumping me on the head with his toy pistol, trying to get me to be the cowboy, and I said no. My mom and Dad didn't believe in guns, even fake ones, and I wasn't allowed to play with them. John's was slick and silver and tried very hard to look real, exactly like an old six-shooter, before they had laws about those things. John shot me 1,000 times, and I didn't die. Dad waited until John had gone to the pisser to come clean to me. You know that nice lady who sat by me on the chairlift? I swallowed a lump of dry tuna salad and nodded. Well, she said there's music tonight at the lodge. Important music. Who? I said. It's a surprise. You know him, but you don't know him live. It's gonna blow you up. I didn't care much about his music back then, but I knew my dad wanted me to. Jazz was like his job to me, which meant it was like his name to me. Later, I think of it as less like his job and more like another man's booze. Back then, I didn't know what I was inheriting. I get to go with you? I asked. Of course you get to go. I wouldn't let you miss this. But you gotta do me a big favor first, he said. Tickets are kind of expensive. He kicked at a mound of snow and some got in his sock and he grimaced. I remember it was a night for plumes of snow off in the distance, gusts of white that looked like mist belching from the mountain. There must have been a wind somewhere kicking up the powder, but it wasn't there with us. Dad said, you're going to have to be a spy and get us in. You know, how we've done before at China Buffet. I knew how we'd done at China Buffet, and I didn't like it. It was cheating. I kicked more snow at him. Is this for that lady? I asked. He placed his hand on top of my head and tilted it up, so I was looking at him. Scott, you might as well know now. Not everything has to be for a lady. The three of us scooted around outside the venue where the band was going to play. John said his dad would never let him have fun like this. While we stood by, waiting for the right moment, John shot his pistol at every person and window and dog we passed until Dad took it away for being annoying. "Hey, that's not yours," John said, but Dad put it in his pocket. "Dad sucks," John whispered to me. John and I got inside by walking in with an old couple. They didn't even see us, busy in their rings. The venue was a big room made of thick cedar with a stage in front where the band tuned up. I caught sight of the blonde lady from the ski lift and tried to avoid her. I held my breath and did my 10 hard blinks, and then John did the stupid thing of waving her down. I gave him the stink eye. "What?" he said. "She's foxy." She strolled over and said, "So, you boys are jazz fans too?" "We like it a ton," John said. He looked at me, I shrugged. I watched the musicians winking to the ladies from the stage. I couldn't remember their names, but I'd seen them on my dad's albums. They looked fatter. "I shouldn't tell you this," she said. "Makes me sound so old, but I've listened to him since he picked up the sax." Through her 2 red lips, she said, "Where's your daddy?" "Outside," I said. She walked with us to the side door where he was waiting outside, just like we planned. When Dad saw her, he grabbed her arms and said, "Can you believe it, Morton Howell?" She kissed his cheek, and Dad glanced down at me like I scared him. "I just love the sound. I don't want to think about it too much. Thinking's the opposite of music." A young guy with a pork pie hat turned around and shushed us, so Dad leaned down and whispered, "It's like you, kiddo. I love you, but I haven't the faintest clue why." "Is that how you love Mom?" I asked. He unbent himself and spoke to the stage. I could barely hear him say, "No." Dad always said that it was all about the standard. He thought that purely free jazz was like building the ground you're standing on at the same time as jumping off it. There's too much to think about, and thinking gets muddy. The standard does the thinking for you, he said. You've got to have a common ground in order to fly. You've got to have something to return to. Howell stopped playing in what seemed to me like the middle of a song and wandered off stage. The band took a break, and the blonde woman herded us all closer to the front, knocking us into people, laughing with her big red lips. We were only one scraggly row away from the stage. I could almost touch the wires. The blonde lady leaned close to Dad, her martini knocking in her glass. "Does he seem loaded to you?" she asked. Dad shrugged and said, "He always holds it together." She said secretively, "Did you know his father died right in front of him when he was just a kid? Crashed his car into a lake and froze to death." Dad shook his head. "Not in front of him," he said. Howell had run away, thought the cops were dragging him in for truancy, didn't know they were bringing him in to identify the body. The band settled back into their instruments. Howell staggered to the front of the stage and said gruffly, "You know this one, all right." Dad closed his eyes and told me the name of the next song, Wave. Slowly, Howell ached it out. There was the sax and the piano below, each short note punctuating a long one. The music rippled in the water still stuck in my ears, an ant army of drum beats all over my skin, the throb of the bass, the jungle swing of the sax. Music so hungry, it made you hungry. Yet the song felt like it wasn't even there, like water doesn't have a feel when you're in it. And then, with only one lonely note, it flooded the place. We were swimming in it, the whole room was water. And then there was the drowning. The sax yelled and yelled, went hoarse at the top. Howell's childish repetition on the horn, "Why? Why? Why?" And we heard it, all right. And yet we couldn't hear it above its own noise, trying to convince us of his side of the story. It happened this way. I'm telling you, it happened this, trying so hard to be heard that his voice is lost. Playing his horn below the bright surface and above us, and we see him down there screaming for his life, muted by water and depth until he resigns, dives further deep now, writhing, building a storm down there until anger is swept off by despair. I looked up at my dad. He was crying. I'd never seen him cry in all my life, but he didn't try to hide it. He looked at me and smiled, then smeared his face with his palms like he didn't know there were tears all the way down his neck until he saw me staring. Howell changed his tune to something lighter, like he knew we needed a break. Then the blonde woman saw Dad's face too, and I didn't like the way she looked at him. "Isn't that cute?" she said, laughing lightly and touching his wet cheek. Dad whipped her hand away and said to her, "Cut the crap." It wasn't a slap, really, but it was something, and she shrank away. I thought that was real good at the time. But part of me realized even then, this was a history lesson in failure. It could have been a shoebox diorama, the kind we made of Indian families in school. Us in the cedar venue, bucking around to the horn, slapping women's hands when they got too close. Embarrassed, Dad reached into his coat pockets. He pulled out John's pistol, then dug further in, searching for something to wipe his blubbering face. John grabbed the gun from Dad's hand and whined to me, "Come on, I'm bored, let's play Star Wars." Then he shot me again. I'd had it. He was ruining the music. I yanked the gun from him and hit him on the head with it. We started wrestling and bumped into my dad and some strangers next to me. "That's enough," my dad whisper yelled. He snatched the gun out of my hand and waved it around, and someone in the crowd yelled, "He's got a gun!" Dad raised his hands innocently, the not-so-fake-looking six-shooter dangling, and said, "Man, it's a toy." And then the music stopped. The horn first, then the drums and piano, the bass was last. The slow stop seeming less intentional and more like forgetting. Howell stepped close to a mic and cleared his throat, a new kind of percussion. "Excuse me," he said. He tapped the mic, then grinned maniacally in our direction. "Yeah," he said. "Excuse me. What in God's hell is happening?" Dad looked around and then up at the ceiling, searching for some angel Howell must be talking to. "I'll take care of this one, fellas," Howell said to the other players. He had something of an effeminate drawl. Then he turned to Dad. "Yeah, you, mister. I'm speaking to you. Since you must be a brilliant man, you must have something brilliant to say. Tell it to me. Come on, tell it. What is the conversation?" "I don't know, sir," Dad said. "You were playing is all, and my kid here." "Don't call me that," Howell said. "Sir, S-I-R, standard idiot referent. But that is a gun." Dad looked down at the gun in his hands. Howell stretched his arms above his head, causing his horn to glint in the light. He said, "It's good to take a break, isn't it, folks? Sometimes we can just have quiet." The blonde woman edged farther from us. People were muttering. Someone in the crowd yelled, "Hell no!" Others booed. Howell laughed wildly. "That's right. Hell no, hell no, hell," he said. "You came here to hear music. The only true music you'll ever hear, if I may say so. But there's one man among you who don't want to listen." The jeers became more urgent. A security guy was edging toward us, ready to boot us out, but Howell waved him away. To the crowd, he said, "Shut up! Shut the hell up!" And the crowd did as they were told. How could they not? Howell swayed a little at the mic and grabbed hold of it. "I say, is that a gun?" Howell asked. He was looking directly at Dad. "Were you trying to kill me?" "It's a toy," Dad said. "If someone tries to kill me, does that mean I am as famous as I'll ever be?" Howell turned to his bandmates and laughed. It seemed that was the cue for them to laugh too, and they tried. "I was not trying to kill you," Dad said. His voice was desperate but not shaky, I remember that. Then he turned to me and said, "Tell him, Scotty, tell him I wasn't." Both men looked at me and I said, "Nothing." Funny how a moment can get stuck in your head like a song. That was a long moment. Sometimes I think I'm still in it, leaving him out to drive forever. "It's all right," Howell said, as much as to me as to Dad. Man, I wouldn't stick up for my pops if a gun were pointed at his head. But there's something, Howell said, that I've been meaning to tell you. What was it? Tell me, what in God's hell was it? Who changed the subject? My father had a rope. Then Howell punched himself in the forehead hard and slow 3 times. It seemed to me that he was counting. That's all right, Howell said. I remember now. Here it is. This man with the gun, he's all of you. And you're no better than hecklers. You're not even listening. You just sway there on your feet, thinking about something else while I'm telling you with my tune. I'm talking to you about important things, and you're thinking about some sad old lover with silk balls. The drummer started to rise to stop him, but changed his mind. When Howell spoke again, it was as if he picked up the horn and was simply continuing the song, that same smooth blue tone. He said, "There was a gun once that was not a toy, shot through the sky and made the stars." Play that one, boys. Play the one that made the stars. But the boys looked at each other doubtfully. "The gun shot through the dark and made the stars," Howell said, running his fingers down the buttons of his horn. "Play that one. Play the one that made the stars. The one that made the stars." Then he turned his back on us and hit himself in the head again and again and again. The piano player tried to stop him, and even as Howell kicked him away, he never stopped hitting himself. I finally turned from the stage to my father. He'd been looking at me, looking at Howell, and he was horrified. When we got home, it was 5 in the morning and the birds were out. Dad and I stood in the driveway looking at the VW, her top sunk in. "I can promise you one thing," Dad said, eyes fixed on the sunken roof. "I will never cut a record. You'll never have to hear any music from me. Got that?" "Mom's going to be mad," I said. I grabbed his hand. A light turned on in the house, and I could see my mom in her bathrobe squinting at us through the window, her arms crossed. A shunted man, my mom would later call him, loved his music more than me, she'd say. And I would say that wasn't true, to make her feel better. I didn't get what he meant then, but I trusted him. What I think now is that he meant he was sorry he ever gave me his music. Like it meant I'd turn out like him. He was afraid that might be a bad thing. Later, when he did fall into bed with a different blonde woman, he came clean, and I never understood why. It's what had him alone in a moldy room in the back of a Fresno factory full of dust jackets and warped vinyl that he played until the end, and nothing and no one else. That's where they found him, after a few days. If he weren't so stupid and so honest, things would have been different. Or from that night on, jazz was a private affair. I guess he was embarrassed, but I felt punished for failing to stick up for him against Howell, for failing. He'd turn off the Revox whenever I came home, and he moved all his records out of the den. Of course, I still knew where they were, under his bed, and how he organized them by year. But he kept them out of sight, away from me. And I know he never stopped listening to Howell. With my mom off at her night shifts, I'd listen to the linty end of a session while I lay on the carpet by my dad's closed bedroom door, all the lights off in there. And Howell, he's still going, even after half a dozen suicide attempts. One of those old jazz players whose stuff has gotten a little cheesy, but you listen out of respect. He might have gone religious or changed his name to something Indian or beat his wife, I don't know. Didn't matter what the man did. Dad listened until the end. He could separate the art from the artist. Can't do that with fathers and sons. I'm not the expert on my dad, but I have his records now, and I'll listen to Howell. Wasn't much for funeral fare, but that's what I chose to play at Dad's. Because he knew that something beautiful could mushroom up out of something vile. If we stop listening, the shame and ugliness will triumph over the greatness of the music. So you could see Dad as a kind of martyr in that way, listening to the vile man to keep the vile man at his horn. Thank you.